Hi, I'm Helen Bauer, and this is the Heart of Hospice podcast. The Heart of Hospice podcast is your source for compassionate and informative discussions about hospice and end-of-life care. I'm a certified hospice and palliative care nurse with over 15 years of experience. Whether you're a caregiver, someone with a serious illness, or you simply need to know more about hospice care, this podcast is for you. Join me as we explore all the aspects of hospice, from the details of caregiving to the emotional and spiritual dimensions of end-of-life journeys. For more resources and to connect with me, visit theheartofhospice.com and find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Keep listening for today's episode.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hi, this is Helen, and I'm here to share some exciting news with you. During the month of November, the Heart of Hospice podcast is bringing you 4 special episodes featuring end-of-life educator Barbara Carnes. Barbara is going to be sharing stories about her hospice career that you've never heard before, talking about the lessons she learned along the way and her dreams for hospice in the future. She'll also be talking about her personal caregiving story and her grief journey following the death of her husband. Each episode will be published on Mondays during the month of November, which just happens to be National Hospice and Palliative Care Month and National Family Caregivers Month. You can hear the first episode on Monday, November 4th, so be sure to like and follow the podcast on your favorite podcast platform so you won't miss an episode. I want to thank my friends at the Death Deck for sponsoring this special series with Barbara Carnes. Be sure and check out their newest product, the End of Life Deck. With a casual tone and open-ended questions, the End of Life Deck makes starting conversations about what matters most a little easier. Visit thedeathdeck.com to learn more.
This episode is sponsored by GrandPad. GrandPad is the all-in-one tablet designed especially for senior adults. With GrandPad, you get safe, simple video calling and photo sharing. Users can create a private family network that allows for secure photo and video sharing. The GrandPad utilizes a simple format that allows seniors to enjoy games, music, email, and more. Visit our special GrandPad website designed exclusively for the Heart of Hospice listeners at grandpad.net/THOH.
I have a quick update for today's episode. My guest, Susan Hearn, is no longer affiliated with Odonata Care and the Hospice Care Plan. She's currently working to establish a new residential hospice home in Oregon. We wish her the best of luck. My guest, Susan Hearn, has a passion for serving hospice and palliative care patients and families. She was a pioneer in developing hospice programs throughout Oregon. She went on to pioneer a residential hospice model, which is what we're talking about today. She was instrumental in leading the way in both fundraising and the building and policy development of Celia's house in Medford, Oregon, and Hopewell House in Portland. She's been motivated to give patients and their caregivers a greater voice in their own end-of-life experience and in facilitating meaningful advanced care plan conversations between patients and families. This is a great conversation about residential hospice care. something that I have not worked in before. So I was learning at the same time we were talking. Susan's going to be sharing the residential hospice philosophy and the model that's utilized and talking about what the criteria is for someone to come and stay in the hospice house itself. You're going to hear about the structure of the care team from the hospice house staff. And Susan also is going to be talking about a story of one of the most memorable patients they ever had at the hospice house. So here's my conversation with Susan Hearn. Susan, welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast. We've waited a long time to have you as a guest, and I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks so much, Helen. It's terrific to be here.
It's going to be a good conversation, but we're going to start with something light and easy just to break the ice and kind of pick your brain about your personal thoughts. Okay, so here's your question. If you were ruler of the world, what three advisors would you choose?
Ruler of the world.
Dead or alive, by the way.
Dead or alive?
Yeah, because
Okay.
I think it makes it more interesting that way.
Yeah. Well, the alive one would probably be Brene Brown. I'm a real fan
Ooh, good.
Brene and her wisdom and guidance. I think I would, Gandhi comes to mind and all the wisdom that he brought to his people.
I like it.
The peaceful way of protest and making your messages known. And I guess one of my favorite people is John O'Donohue. He's my favorite, the poet and the author of the Anam-Cara, and he wrote the Bless This Space Between Us, and his wisdom in the hospice world and his wisdom for life. I would just love to hang out with him. And get his advice. And he died awfully early. Isn't an Irish poet and writer, and he really should still be with us. But I would love to hang out with John O'Donohue.
That would be an awesome group. Can you imagine the energy of those people together? Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, very cool.
Okay, so let's dive in. Executive director for the residential hospice houses that you worked with in Oregon. How did you come to that work?
So I have an original interest and inspiration to work in hospice dated back to the AIDS crisis in the early 90s in Los Angeles and Palm Springs. And I was working with some AIDS projects at that time that were serving some of the HIV and AIDS patients with hospice care. So that was my first introduction to hospice care, and recognizing that so many of these young men were being abandoned by their families and didn't have loved ones to take care of them, and how hospice stepped in. And when I moved to Southern Oregon, I worked in the hospice field, helped start a visiting hospice at the large hospital here in Southern Oregon. And we became a very popular place for people to retire. You would say, see those magazines, top 10 place to retire in Southern Oregon, the beautiful countryside and trails and our Shakespeare Festival and things. And so lots of people would come to this area, but they would leave their families behind. Their younger generations would be in some other place. And so there were a lot of retirees that didn't have their own support system, their younger support system. And so the visiting hospices in our area were recognizing that they were able to help people manage symptoms, but often the reason somebody might land back in the hospital or call the emergency room or call 911 was because the caregivers were getting overwhelmed. They had a frail spouse, they were living at home alone, and that there was really a need for a residential hospice. And so that was just a united community, volunteer, retired nurses and doctors that all came together that decided we really needed a residential hospice in our Southern Oregon community. And they hired me to be their executive director. So I was the founding executive director of Southern Oregon Friends of Hospice, and then later was asked to help in some other hospices in the state.
That's awesome. I'm excited to talk about this with you because there's so much confusion about hospice being a place. He went into hospice care. It makes it sound like it's a place you go into where you die. You know, everybody, it's like the haunted hotel. You know, people check in, but they never check out. And it's really not like that. Most of the hospice care that's provided in the United States is provided in people's own private homes, whether it's a nursing home or a private residence or an apartment or even an assisted living or homeless shelters. You know, they're all different scenarios for someone's residence. But a residential hospice house is a little bit different. So tell me what the criteria is for someone to receive their hospice care in a hospice home.
So most of the residential hospice homes, both of the ones that in Portland and in Medford, where I was the executive director, we required people to be admitted to hospice on a hospice service. So it was a collaborative relationship with visiting Medicare certified hospice providers. And the majority of the individuals that came would either come directly from the hospital where the discharge planners had a hospice patient in the hospital and they recognized they couldn't go home, it was unsafe, or the social worker who's visiting in a home setting with a visiting hospice realizes that the situation in the home is becoming unsafe for various reasons of caregivers not being able to manage the care, a lot of panic and anxiety around the caregiving, not enough financial resources to support the caregiving at home. Family members have to go back to work, those kinds of reasons. Most of the residents in a residential hospice stay for 2 or 3 weeks. So it's really the median length of stay is about 12 days. The average is about 24 days. Some people might be there for 6 or 7 months. Many people are there for a week or two. So it's really at that last 4 to 14 days where people become the care burden. They're losing their ability to care for themselves. And so with a cancer diagnosis, they're able to come in when they're still able to care for themselves, but we know that the progression of the terminal diagnosis will be fairly quick. With somebody who maybe is dying of frailty or dementia, they're usually going to be bedbound by the time they come.
You know, there's so many patients that come to us when they're admitted into hospice care and they're already so far along in their disease process. So it's really not a surprise that folks that come into a hospice home experience the same sort of thing. Their length of stay is fairly short. Short.
Yes.
So what I hear you saying is the hospice care is coming from the hospice agency, and then a lot of the caregiving support is done by the staff at the hospice house itself. Who's on the team for the hospice house? What does the staffing look like there?
So what's unique about the residential hospice houses is they are staffed with nurses and CNAs, certified nursing assistants, a spiritual care team, housekeeper, house maintenance and wonderful cooks, and also an extensive volunteer team that supplements the care. So mimicking the multidisciplinary approach of a Medicare certified hospice. They have a specialist being in medicine, being the RN, that's collaborating and working under the orders of the medical director of the visiting hospice and the visiting nurse. The chaplain at the hospice house actually does coordinate a spiritual care team of volunteers. So there's people that sit vigil, so no one dies alone. So there's a substantial alignment between the staffing at the residential hospice with the staffing of the visiting hospice, knowing that the visiting hospice providers can only be there an hour or two, on a visiting schedule, and the residential hospice team is there 24/7.
Which is what our big downfall is in hospice care. We cannot work it to where we can provide that kind of 24/7 caregiving support. And it's a shame because it would be so helpful. I see, and I talk to so many people who are experiencing hospice care these days, where they really have a dual set of issues to deal with. They've got the hospice and the medical decisions and the advanced care plan decisions, everything related to the end of life care. But then they've got caregiving decisions, where to do it, who can do it, how long can they do it, can they afford to do it, do they have the physical ability, and is anybody willing to do it? Because like you were saying, there's so many reasons people don't have a good caregiving system. Sometimes I think the decision to elect hospice care is easier than the caregiving decisions people are having to make. What would you say to that?
I absolutely agree. I mean, the caregiving challenge is, and the expense of providing caregiving in the home is, very, very common in a hospice situation at home. And ideally, we would love to have, a nurse, a caregiver in the family who's very comfortable with that intimate relationship as a caregiver with a loved one. And it's frequently just not available for people. And what's interesting about the two residential hospices that I have been part of is they've been volunteer driven and philanthropically driven. It's been a community-wide recognition of this caregiver crisis, that many people don't have this available to them at home 24/7, and it is recognized as a need, both by the medical community and families who've had any experience with hospice. And so it's been overwhelming, the financial support as well as the volunteer efforts to going into creating both of these residential hospices. And I really, the original Medicare hospice benefit had a 5% volunteer time requirement, which really makes it a beautiful, heart-driven, service-driven model. And I think having that element of volunteerism in support of the residential hospice is what's really making it unique and special, and also affordable for people. So because these hospices, residential hospices, are really on a pay what you can kind of model, with kind of a sense of abundance, that kind of generosity and support to people when they're really struggling is received with so much gratitude, and people want to give it to help that kind of service continue.
It sounds like there's a lot of community ownership. All these hospice agencies collaborating with the hospice house to bring their patients there, the patients that have needs for caregiving. And then you've got your volunteers who come from all different parts of the community as well. So were the hospice houses, are they nonprofit organizations?
Yes, Yes, both Southern Oregon Friends of Hospice and Friends of Hopewell House are both uh, community-driven nonprofit organizations, mostly started by people who were in the healthcare field. A lot of retired doctors and nurses initiated both of the projects, and absolute support of the community. And we did feasibility studies for both of them to determine what kind of support we thought the community would have for this. And it was just almost, 87% of people said, yes, this is really a need in our community and we would support it. And that has proven to be true. Both hospices have cared for hundreds and hundreds of people this stage.
That's wonderful work. And it's wonderful, especially in this day and age, to see people united for something that improves their community. And you're basically caring for your neighbors and your friends and your people that go to church with you. I can imagine the volunteerism is very rewarding. So what kind of tasks, for lack of a better word, do volunteers, what kind of roles do they play in the care of somebody who's at a hospice house?
So the hospice volunteers range from being just a greeter at the front door to working in the garden to cooking, helping the cook, delivering the meals. But there's a special group of resident support volunteers that receive more extensive training. And they spend a lot more time supporting the patients or the residents themselves, sitting in the room, being a listening ear, taking people outside, bringing the music that they want. There's special skilled volunteers with Reiki skills or massage therapy skills, music skills, things like the threshold choir, people that sing at the bedside. And then I'm a volunteer currently at our Celia's house down in Medford, and we do a very special. The volunteers support a very special honoring ceremony. So when after somebody dies in the hospice house, they're offered. The room is cleaned of all the medical supplies, and there's a white tablecloth placed over a table with a switched on candle, electric candle, photographs, sacred objects to that person are put on the honoring table. And then they're offered a honoring ceremony right there in the room. And all of the staff come, all the family gathers. All the residents are receiving a quilt that's been handmade by a local quilting community. So there's quilting volunteers
Wow.
and knitters. So everybody who arrives receives a homemade quilt that is maybe colors or themes that they like that fits them, and they have that beautiful quilt on their bed the whole time they're at the house. And then the volunteers go out in the garden and find flowers, leaves, depending on the time of year, and bring that into the room. And each individual is given a flower or leaves to put onto the quilt and say a few words. And then that quilt is folded and given to the loved one as their gift and remembrance of their loved one and all those blessings that have been added to that gesture. So, there's of course offerings of if the family wants to bathe or anoint a loved one after they've died, that's available to them as well, with guidance or on their own. Yeah.
So it sounds like there's a lot of drawing in of all these people out in the community, all these volunteers with all these different skills and gifts. You've got the hospice team, you've got the staff of the hospice house. Tell me how the family is involved and how is the hospice house supporting the family that's there?
Yeah. So one of the things, teaching about hospice I like to share is that the Medicare hospice benefit is the only medical benefit that actually sees the whole family unit as the recipient of care.
Right.
That social worker and chaplain is there, and the volunteers are there not only to support the person who's dying, but the individual who is experiencing anticipatory grief and needing support as well. So the residential hospice sees the family as the recipient of care as well. They are offered meals. So the beautiful thing is donors have specifically sponsored meals for family.
Oh.
So the residents are offered food, and if the loved ones who are visiting would like to eat, the food services provided for them as well. I remember once I had a mom of many children, and she had 4 children staying the night in the room and her golden retriever.
Oh,
In
nice.
addition, so flexibility about spending the night, staying there as long as they like, is supported in that setting.
So no specific visiting hours or restrictions.
No restrictions on visiting hours at all. And then after, there's a real honoring of people's different religious beliefs and how long they would like to be with the body before the funeral home comes. So there's not a rush about that. And we can accommodate people and their wishes in terms of after the death, how long that they would like to stay as well.
Which is super important. I think people that work in the field in hospice, myself included, when I was seeing patients, there's a little bit of an urgency for us to get on with our workday. But for that family, there should be no urgency. All they know is that moment right then, and we have to meet them at whatever timeline they're on.
Yeah, exactly. And I believe that we really remember the day that our babies are born, and we remember vividly the day that our loved one dies. And the words that we're able to share, our opportunities to say, I love you and thank you and I forgive you and will you forgive me, and all of these important messages. And that supported dying experience where it does feel like I've been able to say the things I need to say, and I knew my loved one was calm and comfortable and felt cared for and was clean in that environment. All of those opportunities that are provided by residential hospice help in the grieving process relieve some of the complex grief that might happen.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true, because hospice care, or whatever kind of care you get at the end of your loved one's life, that makes all the difference. That's the memory that you carry of how your person died. I think we forget that sometimes. What would you, how much impact would you say that kind of thing has on a family?
Well, just knowing how people want to come back,
Oh, yeah.
and remember their loved one at the place of the hospice house. There's also, I neglected to mention, there's a reflection garden where they have stones in the garden with the names of their loved ones. So it is a place they can come back and relive those moments with their loved one and visit their named brick and hang out in the reflection garden. And people are offered a memorial day, like a day to come and remember their loved one once a year at both the residential hospices.
Oh, nice.
As well.
Nice. How meaningful is that? I hope you're enjoying this episode. We're going to pause for just a minute. My guest has more to share.
If you're looking for an easy solution to stay connected to your older loved ones, GrandPad is everything you need. It's the all-in-one tablet designed especially for seniors. With GrandPad, you get safe, simple video calling and photo sharing to connect the whole family. The GrandPad utilizes a simple format that allows seniors to enjoy games, music, email, and more. GrandPad comes with 4G LTE cellular service already included, so there's no need for Wi-Fi. Users can create a private family network that allows for secure photo and video sharing. At the core of the GrandPad team are the Grand Advisors, a group of seniors that continually inspire, test, and guide the development of GrandPad. The company has built a platform that empowers seniors of all ages and technological skills to safely connect with family, friends, and caregivers. No spam, no robocalls, only connections with those you trust. The GrandPad team strives to create a world where no senior is lonely or isolated. It's the smart choice to keep older adults connected. Visit our website today at grandpad.net/THOH or call 1-888-904-4723. GrandPad, keeping seniors connected.
So let's dig a little deep into your personal memories of things. Tell me about an experience you had, a personal experience, about a patient that impacted you, that you remember.
Yeah, I love this. So many incredible humans that I had the privilege of knowing at the end of their life. But one individual, his name was Heinz. He was an early patient. He had taken care of his wife on hospice, and then received a lung cancer diagnosis. And he was watching on the television the news that there was this new residential hospice that was going to be opening soon, and he was like, I hope I live long enough to be able to die there, because he knew what the kind of care he gave to his wife and how he wasn't there to give it to him. And so fortunately he lived 2 or 3 months living at Celia's house. And I mostly was struck the first time I met him with his gratitude. He was just overwhelmed that he could wake up and ask for his favorite cup and his favorite cup of coffee before breakfast was delivered. And he was just in awe about that. So he just faced all of the care he was receiving with a lot of gratitude. But we had trained all of these resident support volunteers to sit at the bedside and have listening and sessions with all the residents in the house. And I called him our first resident support volunteer, because he would, he had his oxygen tank and his cannula and his catheter bag and his wheelchair, but he would strap all of that on and he'd wheel down and he'd sit at the bedside of some of the other residents.
Oh,
and
wow.
With that, he decided, I want to have a gala evening. So there's a beautiful dining room. So he asked the chef, if he was German, of course, with the name Heinz, and he said, I love beef roulade. Will you make beef roulade for me and my friends? And so he hosted a beautiful dinner in the dining room for everybody who was able, that he created friendships with while he was a resident himself. And then he's like, okay, now I want to have a more casual affair. Let's have some bratwurst and beer in the patio. And so he suggested that so we accommodated that and threw a party of a more casual way for him. But what I just loved his resilience, his beautiful resilience all the way to the very end of life, and how he continued to give of his heart. And he just sort of represented the heart of a resident support volunteer in such a beautiful way as a resident himself, and made every moment count. And he had a devoted daughter who would come every evening and be with him. And I still talk to her, and she's just so grateful for those last few months she had with him there, and how beautiful his life was, and how not lonely it was. That's the other thing. There's a lot of very lonely people, and it wasn't lonely at all for him in his last days.
How long has it been since you met Heinz?
Heinz came in, he probably came in June of 2018. So it's 5 years ago. now, 6 years ago.
And
Yeah.
what an incredible legacy he's left. He
Yeah.
probably didn't
Yeah.
think about any of that. What he was thinking was community and connection.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
In what is typically a very isolated time for most people.
Right. Right. And he was able to, in a way, if you think about it, somebody who was dying themselves to come sit and be with you while you're dying and listen. What a place of empathy and relating he could be in, as he was experiencing the same thing at the same time.
Yeah. And isn't that a very human emotion to want to connect with somebody who really, truly gets what you're going through? But when you are the one who's experiencing a serious illness, you're isolated in that experience in your own physical body. Even your most intimate partner, your person, isn't going to understand that unless they're sick at the same time with the same illness. So I can imagine being able to connect with somebody who's experiencing the same thing, walking that path towards end of life like you are. That's got to be an incredible connection.
It was a beautiful connection, really was.
What kind of generosity did he have that he could seek that out at the stage he was in?
Yeah, yeah. And had a wonderful sense of humor through it all and brought so much joy to everyone.
I love it that he wanted to create a beer garden.
Yeah.
Basically, brats and beer
Yeah.
out in the garden. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And so much dignity and fun, as well as that empathy and real knowing of what everyone else was going through as well.
I love it that you've carried this through your work. And you were the executive director. You weren't doing bedside care, right? You weren't turning to patients and doing pronouncements and handing out meds. I think we have a tendency to forget that our leaders in our organizations see these things. They become connected to our patients and their families. They do empathize. I think we have a tendency to neglect our leaders somewhat. What would you say to that?
Well, my greatest joy of being a leader in that environment was the beginning of it. When people would come, I generally was somebody who was fairly involved in getting to know them at the very beginning when they would come into admission, into be admitted. And I loved to manage by walking around. So that allowed me to participate and get to know people. And so, and see the care and the work that the CNAs and the what we really learned during the pandemic, the essential workers were doing,
Right.
and really honor that as well. So, yeah, as a leader, being really connected to the service that we're providing is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So now you're working with one of my favorite companies, Odonata Care.
Yeah.
Yeah, providing the hospice care plan as a resource and a tool for caregivers, providing support for their loved one who's on hospice. So you've moved from the residential hospice into a different area, but it's still connected to hospice, end of life care. What's your why for staying in this work?
I feel obviously so drawn to those meaningful moments between loved ones, the messages of love and caring and connection that happens in that end of life time period. All of the stresses of everyday life seem to fall away, and the focus becomes that human connection. So, uh, that is a big why for me. The focusing on what matters most. I love the realization that care is treatment. Working in hospitals and working in the medical community, which I've done a lot of in my career, recognizing that beautiful care that keeps people clean and calm and comfortable, um, and recognizing their whole person, mind, body, and spirit is superb care. And there's an opportunity to do it upstream. It doesn't have to be just at the end of life, certainly. And I love the palliative care movement in general and recognizing that. And uh, the opportunity to work with the two founders of Odonata Care and the Hospice Care Plan. Both of them actually worked at the Hospice House as on-call nurses, and I have known them both for many, many years, and so know the superb care that they provide and taught our residential hospice nurses and residential CNAs, about how to provide superb care. The opportunity to be able to share their wisdom nationally, improve the quality of care in hospice uh, throughout the nation by offering this wonderful hospice care booklet, care plan booklet, and the YouTube videos for education, which we all of us are learning more and more by video instead of reading.
Right.
And I think that they just have so much common sense wisdom, that uh, is a wonderful gift to people at home. And they're making it more and more accessible and easier for people to access. And of course, it increases the quality of care that hospice providers are providing. And it gives them a unified communication tool uh, and a reference. So for family members who might be panicking because that something's occurring, they know they have this tool and they can reference it and go, oh, let's try this. Here's an idea, and it empowers people to
Exactly.
be good caregivers.
So the hospice care plan, the fourth edition, I think, just came
Yes.
out. What I really love about it, because I've got one and I have used it because I wanted to check out and see how it worked. There's a QR code for each of the videos that's related to the different topics in the booklet itself. So if you're looking at a page on managing, say, shortness of breath, you can use your phone to scan the QR code and you can go straight to the video that Nancy and Brenda, the co-creators of the Odonata Care Plan, you can go straight in and watch the video that pertains to that topic. So it's a time saver for caregivers, which is huge. Time is very precious to anybody providing care for a loved one. So the hospice care plan is a fantastic resource. It's amazing. And the women, it's, what's that slogan? They know a few things because they've seen a few things. These are people still working at the bedside. They know exactly what people struggle with and what caregivers need at 2 a.m. when they're trying to figure out how to turn somebody who's bedbound and clean them. They know exactly what's needed. So really, the hospice care plan is an amazing thing, and the videos are fantastic. And the videos are free and publicly
Yes.
available online. You can't beat that. So
Yes.
through the years, you've seen a lot of family caregivers as they have moved through end-of-life journeys with someone that they're caring for, someone they love. If you could offer just one piece of wisdom to a family caregiver who's walking this journey, what would you tell them?
I think a piece of wisdom that I learned is that your loved one who's dying is okay. Their body knows how to die. They know how to die, and they're okay. And you, they know that you love them, and that uh, it's a wonderful gift to be at your loved one's side at the end of life, if you can be. And if you miss the opportunity to be there, I share that it's okay to say the things you want to say, either in your mind or in your heart or in out loud, if you didn't get the chance to say those things, if you feel you've missed that opportunity. Um, and it's just my belief that that message is still received. And and I think that it's a wonderful gift to be able to share your heart, and what's true for you with your loved ones.
I think that's probably one of the most beautiful pieces of advice that I've ever heard anybody give a caregiver, that you can say the things either out loud or in your own mind, and the message is still received. Okay, so how can listeners find Odonata Care, access the resource, get the booklets? Hospice agencies get the booklets for their patients. How can they access the resources you guys have?
So the resources to get the booklet are at the website, at thehospicecareplan.com. You can also put in careplan.net and get there, but thehospicecareplan.com is the actual website. You can buy a single copy of the booklet, or you can buy a box of 100 for just $495, which is less than $5 per booklet, which is really, really a wonderful, affordable price. Then the YouTube site, just Google the Hospice Care Plan and or search it on the YouTube engine, and it will go to the whole site. And you can look at the 200 different videos there. There's some that are 2 hours long that are sort of a crash course in hospice nursing. There's others that are tips for use of the booklet, how to make the most of using the booklet, and then all of the specific different symptom management is outlined and in specific playlists about breathing and about feeding and oral care, about medical management, about the dying process, etc. So that's all available on the YouTube.
Great resources. Susan, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing everything. I'm looking forward to great things from Odonata. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Helen. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Heart of Hospice podcast. Check out our sponsor in the show notes, and please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate it if you would share this episode with your friends and family and anyone who needs to know more about hospice. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.